Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian up on Capitol Hill, where we have just attended a panel discussion on fifth-generation combat aircraft capabilities sponsored by the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. And we have with us Major Dave Ghost Deptula Jr., who is a former F-22 pilot. You were one of the pilots who took the F-22 into combat operations in Syria, and you're now a legislative aide up here for Senator Dan Sullivan, Republican from Alaska. Tell us a little bit about the capabilities that the F-22 brought to the fight against ISIS.
Oh, well, thanks for having us. I think kind of like what you heard on the panel today is that when you think about the F-22 and the F-35 and some of these aircraft that we're starting to use, these fifth-generation aircraft, that really information is what they bring to the fight, not just in Operation Inherent Resolve, but also in kind of the full spectrum of conflict operations that the United States is asked to be ready for. So really that information, I think, is the biggest piece. So the airplane can show up, collect information and pass information, not just amongst other F-22s, but to other U.S. and coalition partners, F-15s, F-16s, A-10s, B-1s, and all these other airplanes that are taking the fight to the enemy over there in OIR, and really share that information and really enable those other platforms.
How do you respond to those people who look at it and say, well, the F-22 in that environment was overkill, it's very permissive airspace, over Iraq itself there are no surface-to-air missiles or any-access area denied systems. How do you respond to those who say that, there's no role for an F-22 in that theater?
Well, I would say that in terms of over Iraq, there are no surface-to-air missile systems or enemy fighters trying to shoot us down over in Iraq. But as you kind of go from the east of Iraq to the Iraq-Syria border and then further west, you start to see those air defense systems start to improve. You've also seen more activity from the Russians getting involved in Syria. And I don't want to comment on anything that's currently ongoing just because my information is old. But you see that as we start to get closer to those threats, there are significant surface-to-air missile threats and advanced fighter aircraft that are a factor to the United States and the coalition and our objectives. And when you have an aircraft like the F-22 and the F-35 in that kind of environment, you're able to get closer to those threats and really, again, enable those other platforms to do their job and focus on their tasks and then allow us to take care of those other more advanced threats.
You were an F-15 pilot before you transitioned to the F-22. Talk to us a little bit about the mental difference in how you're operating each one of these systems. Still very, very high-end capabilities, still very high-end aircraft, but very, very different aircraft.
Absolutely. So I would say in the F-15C, the biggest difference was that I was spending probably 80% of my time working to collect and gather information manually. So I had a green B-scope radar that I was trying to dig out targets on, lock up those targets, and then try and identify them. Meanwhile, I'm looking at other places in the airplane, like my radar warning receiver, to assess whether or not other threats are looking at me. And I have to look outside and actually turn my head and visually keep sight of the other airplanes that are in my formation that we're all working together. The difference in the F-22 is now I spend about 80% of that time making decisions, and I have all that information available on any one of the multiple displays in the airplane. So I don't have to mentally combine information from my radar or information from my radar warning receiver. It's already fused for me on the display. And what that does is, again, emphasizing the information, I'm able to pass on what's important and what's relevant to that Viper pilot or to that Strike Eagle pilot or B-1 pilot who's prosecuting an attack, and tell them what's important and what's not important so that they can focus on their task. And then at the same time, still go in and accomplish my task as well.
One of the things you mentioned was the importance of readiness and training and getting out and operating with the system. A lot of this is all about muscle memory, so then in a stressful situation, you know exactly what to do. You're up on the Hill now. What's one of the messages that you're taking to your member, but other members as well?
Training is really important. We train like we fight, and when we stop training, then what happens is our skills atrophy. These airplanes are fantastic. The F-22 and the F-35, as well as all of our other fourth-generation airplanes, are incredible machines. But if we don't go out and put our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in situations where they have to train and fight in these large force, realistic training exercises, like Red Flag Alaska, then they aren't going to see those capabilities, and they're not going to be able to innovate and come up with new ways to tackle these emerging threats. So training is really important, and make sure that we're ready for the different things that we're asked to do.
And one last question about fourth and fifth generation aircraft integration. F-22 obviously has discussed that it doesn't have the capability to share information as broadly as the F-35 can. But was that ever a limitation at all for you to be able to engage in operations that leveraged and brought your fifth generation capabilities to a fourth generation force?
For me personally, no. I would say one of the highest compliments that our squadron was ever paid was by another F-16 squadron that we were deployed with, and they basically said, "Hey, Ghost, your squadron, they always showed up on time, they always hit their targets, and they only ever spoke up when it was really important." And so we knew what information and when to listen. So I never saw that in my specific instance that it was a factor. That doesn't mean we don't have a ways to go and a ways to improve in our passing and sharing of information, but that was my experience.
But ultimately, it's something that makes the force stronger, your contribution to it.
Absolutely. And mostly what the F-22 community has contributed to the fight, along with everybody else.
Sir, thanks very much and best of luck.
Thanks very much.